Good evening. Welcome to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council Budget and Finance Committee for Thursday, June 26, 2025. Call to order at 6 p.m. First item is an adoption of the agenda. Do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda is adopted, and our next item is a director's report from Director Lindsay Bond.
And I will give our clerk just a minute to put it up on the screen. As we walk through it, please remember that it is our budget monitoring dashboard. It is a biennial budget, so it's 2 years. So then walking down to the first item that shows up as yellow, that's labeled as Crime Watch, which is 73%. It's a small budget in relative to the entire general fund. But that item is at 73%, and in digging, it looks like it's more of the community policing supplies that are within that. So it's labeled Crime Watch, and so I'll have to talk to the chief about have a conversation with that if that is truly the appropriate place to be putting those supplies. And if that is, then we need to change the label to reflect exactly what it is, which is Crime Watch Community Policing. So just a little heads up on that. Walking down to dispatch, that is at 25%, and that's gonna always be, when we're close, it's probably always gonna show as yellow, because walking to Norcom, when we they always invoice early, so that is never going to kind of follow like an operating. We're always gonna pay in advance of those services on a quarterly basis. So that one will trend in that manner. And then going down to executive, that's at 21%. The target is 20.8. It's really close to tracking on the operations. Not as concerned about that. Facilities is the next one. That one we will have an additional conversation about later on the budget amendment item, but that is due to the amount of facilities challenges that we've had this year. And so we will amend, those are hopefully one-time costs, but we will have to amend that up as our public works director has done a great job identifying and fixing them so that we are in a safe building. And then going down to municipal services, some of these also that are driving the higher levels is annual costs such as like insurance. And that department has already attended their annual conference for the year. And then there are some other costs that are trending upward but are tied to revenue. So within the municipal services, postage is trending quite a bit higher than usual, but that is tied directly to a revenue source, which is passports. Definitely one to keep an eye on. I'm not super concerned about it, but paying attention to it. And then on police, that is actually one that's at 22%. And that is an item that we're going to discuss on the budget amendment, because actually that is third party. The overtime that they're working is third party, such as for UW, and there's some others. It's not just UW, but they provide security services, and so then the city gets reimbursed for those services. And so that's a direct pass through. We will increase the revenue and the expenditure, so it'll be a both side. I am going to take a minute to actually point out the prosecutor and public defender is only at 7%. And that is because we have not seen a prosecutor invoice yet within this year. And so she is well aware of that, and hopefully we will see them within the next month. And so then that will change. And then just walking down the sewer operations, that's on target. Street maintenance, street operations. Okay, just making sure that one shows at 15%. And The traffic safety camera, we're going to go into that, that fund separately later in over the overview, so I figure we'll just hold that conversation and we walk into that overview. And then I'm going to pause unless anybody has any questions, or just keep going.
Are there any questions? No?
Okay. So then non-operating audit, we just haven't started. So that's gonna not show until we do. Community programs, that's at 15%. Elections, that's an annual cost. Emergency management, again, an annual cost. Lakefront property is at 19%. Memberships, 42. Most of those are annual. Police technology, public health. And then walking over to the revenue side, the capital improvement is at 22%. General fund is tracking, now that the first wave of property taxes has been receded. The sewer utility revenue at 20%, that's really close to being on target, not one that's causing concern for me at this point. And then the street fund revenue, that is at 14%. And kind of the two items there is the construction right of ways are coming in a little bit lower than what we have anticipated, and that's just one we're going to keep an eye on. And then the motor vehicle excise tax, so the gas tax, that is trending a little bit lower than usual. The surface water utility is at 32%. Again, that one is tied to property. Property taxes on that same cycle is when we receive the revenue at two different times. And then the traffic safety fund, that is the one that we will go over separately. And then the transportation capital, that one is trending at 4%, which that is greatly tied to the roundabout project. So again, there's a lot of expenditures there, but then revenues. So if the revenues, if the expenditures haven't gone out, it's a reimbursement based grant. And so then we won't see those quite yet. And I'm just pause,
Are there any questions?
or I keep moving. Okay. And then walking down to the capital side of things. So the 35th drainage. And for some reason in Tableau, I'm just going to point out that we cannot figure this out for the life of us, is that some of the capital on this graph, and I don't know if it's because we're trying to put too many within this sheet, they're dropping. So the one I want to point out specifically is the locker rooms, the PD locker rooms on the back. And we can look on the back page, but I just want to point out that that project is complete. And it did go, we had the budget for the actual locker rooms for that main contractor. There was a couple other costs that were not included that ended up having to go into that project in addition, with some like electrical and just some outside things that needed to be adjusted. So I just want to point that out. Currently, the other projects, the asphalt overlay, that's something that our public works director that they've scheduled and are working on. I think that's coming soon. The beach drive lift station is currently under design. L90, the design is still underway for the culvert. And the material bin covers is underway, and you will start to see that. We have paid a couple of those invoices, so you will start to see those on, actually, I believe it's June's, because those were paid at the beginning of June. So starting next month, you'll start to see some actual activity under that, which we'll actually discuss briefly under the budget amendment too. And then the roundabout, which we basically had to walk through, and quite a few contractors showed up to that. So it was, I know that the public works team was very excited about that. Are there any
questions.
Okay, so then walking down to the other side, all the numbers that populate the front side of the tableau report. And then I'm just gonna go over the revenue by line item, the ones that we've cherry picked out to keep an eye on. The business tax is coming in at 33%. The construction permits are at about 24%. The gas tax, motor vehicle excise tax, that is at 14%. Definitely have my eye on that and we'll be watching. The mechanical and plumbing is coming in at 31%. Passport revenue, as I stated before, is coming in strong at 26%. The real estate excise tax is at 26%. Sales and use tax is at 23%, and the traffic safety camera is at 18%.
Are there any questions?
That concludes my overview.
Thank you. With that, it will bring us down to new business, and the first item is the 2025-2026 budget amendment list. And I'm gonna look to Director Vaughn.
Absolutely. So this is just the first touch on the overview. Anything that can wait to the mid-buy, we try to let that, so for a bigger conversation. But there are some items that we definitely cannot wait for the mid-buy in order to address. The first one on the list, I'm hoping that, perfect, thank you so much, Matt. That we can pull it up on the screen. I mentioned on the report that we have the police services, the reimbursement from third parties. It is a revenue pass-through, so that is going to tie directly from the 165 on revenue to expenditure. It's a direct pass-through. And then if you remember back to the very beginning of 2025, how I came and provided a report saying that the court had originally asked to increase a probation officer from a 0.2 FTE to a 0.3. And that was just unintentionally missed as the budget was being put together. And so I brought it forward saying that there was some cost involved in that decision in order to expand that FTE for the level of basically the demand of that position. And so this is the adjustment in order to make that right under the salaries and the benefits, which should be the second one, not court salaries twice. So then going down to the police salaries per the CBA, which is the collective bargaining agreement that was ratified after I think within the first quarter of this year. And so at that point there was some additional funds that were required outside of what was put into the original adopted budget. So therefore, we needed to adjust the 25 for the 25 and 26 for salaries and benefits. And I will pause there to say there are some big variables that I'm only using the percentages. There are we're aware of that within this year, there are three, one of which we've already had an officer retire, and there are two more that we know of that are planning to retire this year that have been with the city for a very long time. That does have a cost to it. And so the city historically has not done budgeted a large amount for those buyouts at the end of their when they do retire. And so that's something I just want to bring to your attention, that I could be coming back to you at the mid-buy or later in 2026 as a heads up. I do not intend to try to over adjust the budget for the anticipation of that, and because we've had some positions that weren't filled, there's some varying factors. So I just want to be more cautious on that front, but I want to bring it to your attention that we could be having a additional conversation there.
You mentioned that, we don't have we have some positions that aren't filled, so would that mean that our expenses are lower?
Right, if there was like a position that was vacant or that hadn't been filled, then that we had budgeted, so there's some varying.
So, do I understand that we have 3 police officer positions that are not currently filled?
No, we have 3 that will be retired.
3 that will be retiring, thanks.
And then we will be replaced. Yes. So sometimes during that transition, there can be a flux. So I probably should correct that state.
Does that,
Right. Right, but the moment we're fully staffed. Is that correct?
They got paid for fully staff, whether they're available on the road is a question for the chief, whether they're training FTO, so they're not out on their very.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
did that include the officer that just retired?
The opposite.
He had a retiree.
Yes.
Is he one of those 3?
Mhm.
So he's in this group.
Yes. Yeah, he's one of the ones that we definitely knew about. And then walking down I'm calling it the court and the municipal services laserfiche that the clerk took the lead on in order to bring that forward. And we had it budgeted when we went to go have that conversation. It did, the clerk, Matt, brought it back and to have the conversation that it was about $12,000 over the anticipated what we had budgeted. And so this is the amendment to just correct that so that we have the accurate budget entered. And then within the next couple are for public works under the general fund. So the parks, there's a gate going in at the Lion Preserve, so that needs to be amended. And then the facilities that I had brought up previously, that there's been a couple definitely unforeseen items within the building, City Hall, that have needed some immediate health and safety attention that we didn't have, the director didn't have an option on whether or not to take care of them. We just had to act. And so those budgets need to be amended.
Question.
I believe a small portion or some portion of that was something we were submitting for reimbursement through an insurance.
did.
Is that something that we'll see at some point as?
Yes.
Both on the revenue side of this?
Yeah.
To balance it, okay.
Yeah,
We still have that info yet?
a portion.
Yeah, I know,
Small
much, but
portion.
I'm getting
For the-
everything.
The cost that went out the door versus what is being reimbursed, there's a variance.
A delta.
There is, yes.
But is that
But-
something we can see with this budget adjustment, or is that something we'll wait?
I will amend it once the revenue actually
hits?
yes.
Thank you.
When the money actually, when we get the check and we actually see it, that's when. And if it does happen prior to us moving forward, because I'm not anticipating bringing this back until the second meeting in July, because I won't be at the first meeting in July. And if we do have it by that time, then I'll make that revision to show the revenue coming in for some of those expenditures.
Appreciate you not showing it till it hits our pocketbook.
So then walking down to the traffic safety fund. On that, there's a couple items that this was one of the first items that I brought forward at the beginning of this year. So with all of the changes in the court, they had to readjust all of the furniture within their department and make some adjustments in order to add staff because their desk size, etc., just didn't footprint out. And so they had to bring in and we had to make some changes there. And so that's what these adjustments on the traffic safety fund was, in order to support staff, in order to hire additional staff to complete that. So then going down to the surface water capital fund, I mentioned the material bins. On the capital side, that there's $133,000 change order on that project for contaminated soils. That has been completed, and so we need to amend the budget to increase it for that capital project. Absolutely.
It's not just the contaminated, so if you remember, there were contaminated soils that did not require remediation, but it was cost. But also the just happened there was deposited large chunks of concrete, asphalt, et cetera, which required over excavation and then engineered materials to support the foundation, so it's two costs in there that total that amount.
And is that essentially completed this time, that portion of the exploration and remediation is?
I believe it is.
Okay.
That's Thursday.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So then going down to the vehicle and equipment fund, that is just adding in the conversation, that we've had earlier this year, so it's putting the actual expense to the police, the PD vehicle replacement and the public works vehicle replacements in order to purchase the stated vehicles. The public works equipment, that maintenance, that 34,000 is for the sweeper that we had to repair. That we got the notice that we needed to repair that at the very end of 2024. And that work is close to completion, is my understanding. So we'll leave it at that. And
There's a line item in the red, well, I don't know. if
yeah, that just
vehicle
probably
adjustment-
needs.
Is there supposed to be a number attached to that, or is that just?
No, if you actually remember, we funded we left the revenue as far as the funding for the vehicles in place within the budget, but we did not allocate the expenditures. And we didn't allocate the expenditures so that we had to come back, because you cannot spend any form of an expenditure without it being allocated and adopted by city council. So in the middle of adopting the budget, that was what was agreed upon. And so now that it's been agreed upon, I'm bringing back the actual numbers.
Will that line item then be, if we remove, since there's nothing attached to it
Yeah.
anymore? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that completes the budget amendment schedule of adjustments. If there are,
On the public works, there was also in our budget about $100,000 for public work equipment. So is that recognized here? Meaning that are we accounting for this as a net, or is that a separate expenditure?
can I ask what page you're on?
165.
Thank you. Oh, I believe that, the replacement.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the public works equipment replacement. We had budgeted $100,000, so I was trying to understand if this was in addition to the 100,000, or if it would be netted out. Because part of our purchase included riding mower and slip mower.
I think the equipment, hold on just one, if you can just give me one. That actually was allocated in the original budget, the 100,000. It was just the purchasing. So the equipment we allocated that. We did not allocate the purchase of new vehicles, replacement vehicles.
Right, so I was just trying to understand if, because the 510,000, I thought included public work equipment in addition to the vehicles. At least that's how it was represented before.
I can double check that and circle.
Just
I
trying to
will-
understand whether it's an
absolutely.
addition or a net. Okay,
Yeah, 100%.
okay,
I will have to double check and look back at our notes.
I thought you were
To
testing.
confirm. No, I'm definitely not trying to test anybody. And so that completes the overview. If anybody has any additional questions.
So, when we look at these, because these are, siloed budgets. Then when we look at the impact on the, unallocated contingencies, what does that mean in terms of our forecasted, balances?
I will definitely bring that forward for our next touch. I don't have that for this conversation, but I will bring that forward as our next touch. And if we need to still do 3 touches after that, we absolutely can.
I mean, the presumption is that we are using unallocated contingency for both of these.
That's yes, probably less the vehicle and equipment because we already funded that revenue. We just didn't, so it just showed as a growing ending fund balance, which we knew wasn't true at that point, knowing we were going to allocate. It just was taking a pause for a bigger conversation as a group.
Right, but it'll still show up as a reduction in the, end of balance contingency or reserve,
Correct.
however you wanna call it.
Correct.
So that would be helpful to see what it does to the, unallocated end of biennium balances. Okay. Are there any comments or questions? Okay. Very good, so that'll bring us down to. The next new business 4B is review of the traffic safety fund. And should I also ask the Director of Finance and Budgeting, Director Vaughn?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
On to the next item. So this is just a quick overview of going to be the newly created traffic safety fund. 002, and just to keep you guys completely informed on how the revenue is tracking. I broke it down over on the right side so you can see January, February, March, April, May, June. Now, when it shows up as revenue in June, it is revenue that actually came in the month before. So it is it comes into the court system within, say, June's amount will come in within May. So just, and then it's deposited at the beginning of the month, the next month from the previous month's actual receipted amount. So just as a reminder, a friendly reminder on that. So then the revenue, the one line item is the traffic safety camera fines. And then walking down to some of the expenditures on how those are all tracking. The salaries and benefits, you can see, and I tried to do, I probably should have labeled that a little better. It's the subtotal of the court, then the subtotal of the police line items, and then the traffic safety, the traffic camera safety fees. So what we pay to our outside vendor, in addition to some professional services. And then we did allocate in the original budget the public works salaries and benefits for some of the senior project managers. And that position has still not been filled yet to date. And so that's just going to hold in addition to some of the traffic calming transfers to 302. Once we had some better accurate information. And then some of the obligations we just listed out to keep in front and for this fund, which was the roundabout for a 2026 construction, 2 police vehicles, and the court employee allocations. Those have drastically been changing, and I wanted to keep you guys informed. Originally, we had budgeted at 10%. And quite a bit more of their time is being spent on these traffic tickets. And so just keeping you informed that those changes could have a budget impact cost. So just keeping that conversation very open. And then, am I correct that these are associated with school? The graphics, these ones,
At least so.
there's the 24/7, okay, never mind.
So with that in mind, when you're talking about court employee allocations, so at some point you may allocate some of the court costs that are currently in 001, our general fund, to 002 to reflect the sort of actual trust.
And just as a heads up, the court has already surpassed the threshold to hire an additional employee based on the schedule being approved in the budget. They're assessing the current staffing that they have. They have 15, they're working well together. They have. They're on that.
The ticket numbers threshold.
Thank you, Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, I've got a question about the budget for the traffic fines. So in the budget, it's 8 million, which averages out to about 330,000 a month. We're seeing about 270 a month. So I guess my question for you is this a real downward trend? Meaning that the cameras are getting less people to speed, which is policy victory? Or is it artificial that there's a bottleneck, say in terms of the number of court employees or police employees to process the tickets in time?
I'd say it's probably the first. We got through the bottleneck, part of that was due to the administrative office of the courts and some of the holdup with getting our system approved by the state. But I think everybody is comfortable through that bottleneck now. I can tell you that our judge is adding calendars. Remember, she's a part-time judge, so the status rolling into the relation, so we have to address this as we go forward, but as Mayor's reported, I think the speed running 32, 33 down to 3.
Yes, below 23 now.
So it's definitely.
Yeah, it's good to hear then that in terms of the absolute number of speeders and the average speed, that those are both improving.
And that 8 million number was just a figure at, but the cameras would be running, set that budget, so.
Mayor French.
Just on point, thank you, Chair. To your question, Vice Chair Goldman, I think that the policy success is absolutely there. I think that the question of what the trend is going to be, it's a little unknown right now. We're still trying to sort out what the staffing needs are going to be, and I think that we've been playing a wait and see kind of situation here, where we don't know what people are going to do. Kenmore's had a situation where they've seen a precipitous drop in speeders, which is great. But at the same time, they budgeted for different situations. So they're changing how they're gonna how they're making up their cameras, just because they want to make sure that the cameras are rotated around. There's other things going on. I would say, to the question of the general fund, I believe that right now the administration is trying to work with making sure that the expenditures are coming out of the O2 fund as much as possible as anticipated, but there are some unanticipated costs. And so as these things progress, we're going to continue to pivot, assess, inform the council, make sure that we are, right on top of it, and finding any way that we can offset things from the general fund through the O2 fund.
Thank you. Is there an opportunity to brief the council on the status of the studies related to traffic cameras? And as you mentioned, Kenmore rotates to reflect opportunities for increased public safety. And is Lake Forest Park looking at the same?
We're not looking at the same program. I think it's a novel idea. I think we need to see what success will be of that. I think they're doing a great job there. Having said that, we're going to be coming back to you in August with the traffic safety studies. We've got 3 of them coming back to you. We wanted to do it sooner, but we have budget considerations and the middle housing and other things as well. And in July, there's some conflictions with, I'm out of town later in July, and John Pascal's not available in July. So we'll have that, have that discussion. I believe first meeting in August. So there's some other things too that I think that we'll examine when it comes to traffic safety going forward after you've had the chance to take a look at the studies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just,
Councilmember Rubin?
are we anticipating adjusting our budgeted revenue to be more conservative? I know you love to be conservative, so that's bringing it up. Or do you like where we are right now and just gonna see where we are after the end of the years? For the traffic safety fund, sorry, I should.
The
have said
traffic,
that.
yeah, I was completely tracking.
Oh, good.
So on the traffic safety fund, as long as we are monitoring all of it together, and thoughtfully, then I know that we are not going to over allocate on the expenditure front. So as long as those conversations stay very open and transparent, I am okay with leaving the revenue budget number alone as long as we are looking at it holistically, unless we decide as a team that we don't feel that it should stand at 8 million for the next 2 years. And if we do agree that maybe it needs to come down, that we have that conversation together and we fix it or adjust it during the mid biennial budget, or we wait and see how it trends, and then we can adjust it in 2026 if we feel that it's not meeting. This one was just a challenge. Because like it was stated, we adopted the budget when I think we had less than 2 months, maybe 2.5, like just barely 2 months, and we had to be adopting this in order to just put something on paper to move it forward for the next budget, which made it really challenging from my end because I like actual numbers to look at.
I still did really well.
And so if we decide as a team that that's how I look at this, that it is overstating and we don't want to show it that way, then I'm fine. Whatever open conversations we have, that we do it together.
I think it would be useful, I think, for us to move along that a little bit. I mean, in the anticipation, we're gonna continue to see good behavior from the greater community, which would then hopefully result in less tickets. And I'd rather see us exceeding our revenue and knowing that we have that capacity. It's just, like you do, like rather than trying to chase a number that isn't actually listed here, so in your mind, you're chasing the number that you expect us to kind of get close to, even though we don't know yet. That's your
This is definitely the
talent right there.
I want people to comply with what our intention is. Like I believe Councilmember Goldman just said, this is a policy win.
Yes.
This is a policy win,
Absolutely.
so looking at it from that front and just both sides.
Yeah.
So question, so the transfer to 302, those are the expenditures for actual projects.
We have not yet tied them to actual projects.
So this could change based on projects coming up, and you might have a larger, is that the right
We just
category there?
yes, so the traffic calming transfer to 302 of the 300,000, about 150 per year. Again, we had to create some budget.
Yes.
And so, but we didn't really tie it to an actual project. It was a true estimate when we put this together.
Right.
So it's not, the city wasn't counting on this 300,000 in order.
He's raising his hand.
It's like,
So those dollars were in anticipation of potentially designing safe walkways and around things will.
Oh.
But they're just a holding number.
Yeah.
There's no real known cost, but it was just seed money to
Yeah.
get that project on the ground.
No.
On the books forever.
So I guess my point is this number could change based
The
on
300,000.
yes, based on projects.
Yeah, if I may, Chair's indulgence. This is an important discussion, and we can certainly in August have a even more robust discussion about this. The intent of the program was to get the speeds down. At the same time, we all recognize that people are misbehaving all over. And while they're behaving better in this corridor, we have to do improvements in other places. There are opportunities here to bolster the safe streets and safe highways funds through, unfortunately, the mistakes that other people are making out there. And at the same time, hopefully they'll change their behavior over time. So one of the things that we've emphasized here, and we talked about this before, that we're going to continue to try to be cautious about how we allocate these funds until we really know what's happening. And so, Kenmore's expended funds right away. They have programs in the hopper already for years. Sidewalk program on 61st, some other programs. And so at the same time, we're looking at things that we need to get a project manager in place to help engineer some of these things to the 10% level, as to Administrator Hill's point, to get to the Safe Routes to School programs for the 237th Avenue, ironically, 37th Avenues. There's some other programs too that are highlighted in the Safe Routes, Safe Streets program and Safe Highways program. The administration is going to be bringing back to you opportunities for improvements and additional installations on the state routes, particularly because of safety considerations. The studies, I will give you a teaser here. To the north of Ballinger Way to the Kenmore City lines, it is, I believe, 53% of the traffic is going over 5 miles an hour over the speed limit right now. There's other areas that are really challenging between 104, 165th. We have other places too. When you talk about 104 from 522 all the way to 35th, speeds are very, very high. And from 35th on to the city limits, they're very, very high. We need to find ways not to raise revenue here, but to get people to slow down. And as a byproduct of that, we're hoping that we can make these sidewalk and crossing improvements. You all see them. Right now, it's about capacity with staff. Vice Chair Goldman brought up a really great point in a conversation a couple of weeks ago about, can we process all the tickets that we're going to have to be very methodical about, imagine processing the tickets that are going to happen on 522. It's going to be something we have to anticipate what it is, do the best we can, not overwhelm the system, both PD and the courts, and make sure those are processed in a manner that are reflective of the community values here. So we'll get there. At the same time, I think I would love to see some progress on some of these sidewalk and safety improvements based upon the revenues we have available. At the same time, it's about staffing, and we have HR issues about trying to get additional people recruited. Hopefully we'll get a project manager in that can sheepdog these kinds of projects and get us moving in the right direction. This is something that we can do internally.
Thank you, Mayor Penton.
Jack.
Going back to your traffic safety fund, the 2 police vehicle obligation, how does that show up in our budget, the 169,886?
That is correct. I did show it on the budget amendment as just a 501 expense, and so we might need to.
I guess my question is that is the funding for that from 302 to 501? What, so this 2 police vehicles, or when you say obligation, I read this as an obligation to the 002.
We did, yeah, no, he means the 002, yeah.
I
traffic
misspoke.
Yeah, it's okay.
So is this so how does that funding from the 002 show up into the 501?
You are correct that I did not show that. I wrote it down as an obligation from previously having that conversation, but I did not reflect that in the numbers. That is correct.
Does that mean though that when we look at your budget, your schedule of adjustments for the budget amendment 2025, that there would be a revenue increase from.
So, yeah, we would still want to purchase the vehicles out of the vehicle.
Out of the 501.
501, yeah,
Right.
so you would be correct there, but it would show as an expense. So to be
An
frank,
expense to the 501,
yes,
because that's what you were showing here now.
yes. So it will be an expense out of the 002, which will then be revenue in. So what needs to be adjusted is two things. It needs to be an expense showing that.
On the
100
002,
Correct.
and revenue on the
Correct.
501. So when we look at the.
Correct, it'll be adjusted.
Adjusted, so, okay. Okay, you're trying to test me again.
I'm not trying to test you, but I'm doing a really good job of it.
Okay. We're at a quarter to the hour, and I want to make sure that we have sufficient time to make our transition to the council meeting. So I want to check to see if there are any other questions. So I understood though that in August we will get a discussion about traffic cameras and.
Exactly.
And the staff will also be looking at whether or not, like a Kenmore model in terms of rotation is.
Not specifically that is not part of the stuff.
Is
That's
there-
a new one.
Okay, is there an opportunity to understand, based upon. Traffic speeds that we see on our roads within Lake Forest Park to begin to assess whether or not there's a need. For traffic cameras.
Absolutely.
Relocation.
There's absolutely, the studies right now show compelling need for additional installations. I would just say, going back to the police, the vehicle fund, one of the things we discussed with all of you is 2 additional traffic safety officers, making sure that they're full-time, and that allocation goes to the 2 vehicles. I think it's really important for the public to recognize that the revenues that are coming in from these traffic safety camera programs are going straight into improving traffic safety. We're moving forward. We have 2 officers that are very engaged in traffic safety right now, but we're making that transition into people being in that place where they're gonna be able to be full-time. Disallow, with the exception of exigent and urgent situations, so say exigent, it's real hard to say.
Is there a question? No, sorry, Councilmember Ray.
A little bit going back to our dashboard monitor, and one of the things I was trying to, I was looking at the gas tax number being kind of below, and one of the things, as an electric vehicle owner, I recognize that there is a state fee attached to tab renewals. Do we have any idea if any of that tab renewal fees get funneled down to cities, or does it all stay at the state level? Does anybody have any, or can you come back with that answer if you don't know off the top of your head?
Mayor French.
I can tell you a little bit. I mean, the TBD, this council has approved over, and previous councils have approved the various TBD opportunities there. I believe
That's
it's
the.
Transportation Benefit District, terribly well. So we use a lot of acronyms here, and we kind of drink our own Kool-Aid, don't we? But the $50 of the tab renewal comes back to the city. So when we see people that have not renewed their tabs, and those funds go directly into our street service fund. Not service fund, street fund.
But cause I know there's some electric car fee, $150. Some goes into the motor vehicle fund, some goes to transportation improvement account, some goes into a rural trust account. Those are all state funds, correct? So the state version of their EV fees stays with the state, correct?
That is my understanding. Thank you, Councilmember. It's been a point of contention.
Of course.
So, as EV and EV, use increases, that we need to be have the share in those revenues, and that's one of the things that we historically, same thing with shared sales tax. We've had to fight with the legislature to make sure we get that portion of that is commensurate with our contributions.
Okay, so just kind of looking as our embed gas taxes are. Whereas we're watching them and recognizing that people are being hit with these state fees. We don't get any of those state EV fees. So we're just losing revenue.
Yeah,
Unless we
so
use our
it's something I think
CBD.
you're absolutely
Yeah,
correct.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
just checking,
As a-
making sure I was,
There were
Right.
proposals on the table to
None of
change
which-
that, but
sorry, don't want to take up too much of our time. I know the chair is trying to move us along.
So with that, I think if we are, have no more questions or comments, we'll adjourn for the regular council meeting. At 6:50.